Daniel's life was a routine, a comfortable bubble of familiarity that wrapped around him each day. He woke up to the soft chime of his alarm clock, savored his morning coffee as sunlight spilled through the windows, and headed to his unremarkable office job. It was a life he had grown accustomed to, a life that shielded him from the shadows lurking just beyond the edges of his perception. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with shades of orange and purple, Daniel returned to his cozy apartment. He threw his coat on the hook, kicked off his shoes, and slumped onto the couch. The television buzzed with the murmur of the evening news, but he paid little attention. It was the same cycle of events, the same stories, day after day. However, tonight was different. As Daniel idly flipped through the channels, a faint, otherworldly sound cut through the static. At first, it was no more than a whisper, a distant susurration that seemed to ride on the airwaves themselves. His brows furrowed in confusion as he focused on the sound, and slowly, it grew louder, more distinct. A voice emerged from the noise, a voice that was smooth yet tinged with an uncanny resonance. It spoke in a language Daniel couldn't quite place, words that seemed to dance on the edge of comprehension. He leaned closer to the television, his pulse quickening as he strained to understand. It was as if the voice was calling out to him, beckoning him into a realm beyond his understanding. The sound seemed to vibrate within his chest, a strange harmony that stirred something deep within his psyche. He felt both drawn to it and repelled, a mixture of fascination and unease swirling in his gut. Compelled by an inexplicable curiosity, Daniel grabbed the remote and tried to change the channel, to escape the grasp of the strange voice. Yet, no matter how he pressed the buttons, the voice persisted. It grew more powerful, resonating within his mind, drowning out the world around him. He stumbled backward, his heart pounding, a cold sweat forming on his forehead. His living room seemed to blur, the edges of his vision melting away as the voice continued its relentless assault. Panic surged through him, an overwhelming need to silence the voice, to break free from its hypnotic hold. In a desperate frenzy, Daniel unplugged the television, hoping that would be the end of it. But even with the screen dark and lifeless, the voice persisted, its cadence echoing in the recesses of his mind. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the sound found a way to bypass his physical barriers, penetrating his very thoughts. Tears welled up in his eyes as he collapsed to his knees. The voice was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, a force that seeped into his thoughts and memories. He saw images flicker before his mind's eye, fragmented scenes of his past, moments he had long forgotten, and secrets he had buried deep within himself. Amidst the cacophony of voices and memories, a singular phrase emerged, spoken by the strange voice with an eerie certainty. "Embrace the darkness within." The words wormed their way into his consciousness, and a sinister realization dawned upon him. This voice, this radio wave, it wasn't just transmitting sound. It was transmitting thoughts, emotions, and the darkest corners of his soul. It was peeling back the layers of his sanity, revealing the hidden fears and desires that lurked beneath the surface. Terror gripped Daniel as he realized he was losing control, that the voice was unraveling his mind thread by thread. He was caught in a maelstrom of whispers, a storm of consciousness that threatened to consume him whole. As he clung to the remnants of his identity, he could feel the darkness closing in, a malevolent force that relished in his vulnerability. And as the night deepened, Daniel's screams joined the chorus of voices in his head, a symphony of horror that resonated with the very essence of the enigmatic radio wave, a force that fed on the fragments of shattered souls. With each passing day, Daniel's descent into the world of the radio wave grew deeper, like a diver plunging into the abyss. The voice had become an inseparable part of his thoughts, a constant presence that whispered of forbidden desires and hidden fears. It was a symphony of the macabre that echoed in the corridors of his mind, a tune that tugged at his sanity. As Daniel sat in his dimly lit apartment, his eyes fixated on the flickering screen of the television, the voice flowed through him like a current. It spoke of things he had never dared to acknowledge, fantasies he had suppressed, and the gnawing fears that had always lurked in the shadows. Its seductive promises wove their way around his consciousness, wrapping him in a cocoon of wicked temptation. The changes in Daniel were subtle at first. His friends and loved ones noticed a distant look in his eyes, a detachment that seemed to grow with each passing day. He withdrew from social gatherings, preferring the company of the radio wave's voice over human interaction. His laughter, once a frequent sound, became a rarity, replaced by a quiet contemplation that held an unsettling weight. His best friend, Sarah, had known Daniel for years, and she couldn't ignore the transformation he was undergoing. She watched with growing concern as he drifted away from the world they shared, as if tethered to an invisible force that was slowly pulling him into the shadows. One evening, she confronted him as they sat in his living room, the flickering glow of the television casting eerie shadows across their faces. "Danny, what's going on with you?" Sarah's voice was filled with genuine worry as she looked into his eyes, searching for a trace of the person she once knew. Daniel's gaze met hers, but it seemed distant, as if he were staring through her. "I've found something, Sarah. Something powerful. Something that understands me." Sarah's brows furrowed. "What are you talking about? Is this about that strange radio wave you've been obsessed with?" A faint smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "It's more than just a wave, Sarah. It's a connection. It's like I can hear the thoughts of the universe, the whispers of the cosmos, and they're beautiful." Sarah's concern deepened, a pit forming in her stomach. "Danny, you're not making any sense. You're scaring me." The voice, always present, chimed in with a haunting cadence. "She doesn't understand, Daniel. She can't fathom the depths of your desires, the yearning for truths beyond the mundane." Daniel's eyes glazed over as the voice's words mingled with his thoughts. He turned his gaze back to Sarah. "You see, Sarah, it's calling to me. It's calling to all of us, to embrace the darkness within. Don't you feel it?" Sarah's heart raced, and she grasped at his hand, her fingers trembling. "Daniel, this isn't you. You're letting something consume you, something that's changing who you are. Please, you have to fight it." He pulled his hand away gently, his expression a mixture of pity and something darker. "You just don't understand, Sarah. But don't worry, you will." As the days turned into weeks, Daniel's transformation became undeniable. The voice had sunk its talons into his psyche, leaving little room for the man he used to be. He spent hours by the radio, listening to its alluring whispers that promised power and liberation. His once tidy apartment had become a den of chaos, adorned with scribbled notes, arcane symbols, and a palpable aura of dread. Sarah had tried everything, pleading, reasoning, even begging him to seek help, but her efforts were met with a cold resistance. He had become a vessel for the voice, a puppet dancing to its sinister melody. The line between Daniel and the voice had blurred, and in that obscurity, something truly terrifying emerged. Late one night, as a storm raged outside, Sarah paid Daniel a final visit. The apartment was shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the eerie glow of the television screen. She found him hunched over a table, his eyes unblinking, fixated on the radio. "Daniel, please, just listen to me for a moment," Sarah implored, her voice quivering with a mixture of fear and determination. The voice resonated, intertwining with her words. "He belongs to me now. There's no turning back." Daniel slowly looked up at her, his gaze vacant yet filled with a chilling intensity. "Sarah, it's time for you to understand, to embrace the darkness within." With a gesture so fluid it seemed almost unnatural, he reached out and touched the radio's knob. The room seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy as he turned it, and the voice swelled to a deafening crescendo, drowning out everything else. In that moment, as the storm raged and the voice consumed Daniel's very being, Sarah realized that the man she had known was lost forever. The call of darkness had triumphed, and her friend was now an instrument of its unholy symphony, forever bound to the insidious radio wave that whispered of forbidden truths and eternal damnation. Daniel had become a marionette, his strings manipulated by the insidious radio wave. Its voice coursed through his veins, dictating his every move and sculpting his reality. The line between puppet and puppeteer had dissolved, and he was now a vessel for its malevolent desires. Days melted into nights as Daniel roamed the city streets, his movements guided by the radio wave's whispered commands. He executed its dark directives with an eerie precision, like a dancer caught in a macabre choreography. The world around him seemed distorted, a canvas painted with shadows that danced to the tune of his puppet master. The nightmares that once visited him during sleep now bled into wakefulness. Surreal and horrifying visions seeped into his consciousness, blurring the boundaries between reality and illusion. The city became a haunting dreamscape, a labyrinth where time and space bent to the will of the radio wave. In his waking dreams, Daniel walked through a desolate carnival, its flickering lights casting eerie glows upon decaying rides. The sky was a canvas of swirling darkness, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to shift like quicksand. The radio wave's voice echoed through the air, filling the silence with its siren call. "Embrace the chaos, Daniel. Let it consume you." As if pulled by an invisible force, Daniel followed the sound until he reached a twisted carousel. Its once merry horses now had twisted skeletal forms, frozen in grotesque poses of agony. The carousel spun slowly, its mournful melody a distorted dirge that wormed its way into his mind. At the center of the carousel stood a figure, a woman with hollow eyes that seemed to hold galaxies within. She wore a tattered dress that fluttered in the spectral wind. Her voice joined the radio waves, harmonizing in a dissonant symphony. "Welcome to the dance, Daniel, the dance of death." With an eerie grace, the woman extended her hand, and Daniel found himself unable to resist. He stepped onto the carousel, and as it spun faster, the world around him melted away. Reality twisted and contorted, and he was transported to a realm where nightmares and reality intertwined. In this surreal domain, Daniel encountered others like him, people whose minds had been ensnared by the radio wave's power. They moved with a haunting elegance, their movements synchronized to the same foreboding rhythm. They spoke in hushed tones, their words imbued with a sense of reverence for the radio wave. They called themselves the Disciples of the Abyss, a dark society bound by a shared allegiance to the radio wave's call. Each member had succumbed to its influence, surrendering their individuality to become part of a larger, malevolent whole. Their eyes held a distant fervor, a fanatical devotion to the mysteries the radio wave promised to reveal. As Daniel mingled with the disciples, he learned of their purpose: to spread the radio wave's influence, to amplify its reach, and to gather more souls to join their eerie dance. They spoke of an impending event, a convergence of worlds where the barriers between dimensions would shatter, unleashing chaos and darkness upon the world. In this grim society, Daniel felt a twisted sense of belonging. The radio wave had stripped away his inhibitions, his doubts, and his moral compass. He reveled in the power it offered, the liberation from societal norms, and the embrace of his darkest desires. The dance of death had become his raison d'être, and he reveled in the eerie camaraderie of his fellow disciples. As the city streets became a haunting playground for the disciples, they moved in unsettling synchrony, their footsteps echoing to the rhythm of the radio wave's call. And as they danced through the city's shadows, their forms shifting between reality and nightmare, they prepared for the convergence, the cataclysmic event that would bring the radio wave's malevolent desires to fruition. The dance of death continued, a symphony of souls caught in the grip of a force beyond human comprehension. and as the world trembled on the brink of darkness, Daniel and the disciples moved with a grace that masked the impending doom they carried in their wake. As the power of the radio wave intensified, the boundary between life and death blurred, leaving a haunting tapestry of existence in its wake. The city itself seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, as if it were a living organism responding to the radio wave's call. Daniel, caught in the grip of this sinister force, was both a puppet and a pawn, trapped in a nightmare from which there seemed no escape. Amidst the dissonant symphony of the disciples' dance, Daniel's mind began to steer with fragments of clarity. He realized that the only way to break free from the radio wave's clutches was to delve into the organs of its power, to confront the source of the malevolent melody that had ensnared his soul. Guided by a newfound determination, Daniel embarked on a perilous journey, tracing the radio wave's echoes to a long-abandoned broadcasting station at the outskirts of the city. The station stood as a decrepit relic, a monument to a bygone era when it had once transmitted music and news to the masses. Now it resonated with an eerie resonance, a conduit for a darkness that defied human comprehension. As he entered the station, Daniel felt the weight of the radio wave's presence bearing down on him. The air was thick with anticipation, a suffocating tension that seemed to stretch the boundaries of reality itself. Shadows danced on the walls, their movements a grotesque parody of life, and the voice of the radio wave reverberated through the air like a distant thunder. "You've come far, Daniel," the voice whispered, its cadence both chilling and seductive. "But can you truly face the void from which I emerge?" Undeterred, Daniel moved deeper into the station, guided by an unseen force. He descended into its bowels, where forgotten machinery stood like forgotten guardians of a forgotten era. In the heart of the station, he discovered an ancient transmitter, its buttons and dials corroded by time. And there, in the center of the room, a swirling vortex of darkness beckoned. It was the epicenter of the radio wave's power, the nexus from which its insidious influence emanated. As Daniel approached the vortex, the air crackled with anticipation, and the boundary between reality and illusion wavered. His heart pounded in his chest as he reached out to touch the vortex, his fingers trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. The voice of the radio wave swirled around him, its whispers luring him closer to the precipice. "Do you have the courage to face the truth, Daniel?" the voice echoed. "To embrace the darkness and the light that reside within?" With a surge of willpower, Daniel stepped into the vortex, his senses assaulted by a kaleidoscope of images and sensations. He saw glimpses of his past, moments of joy and sorrow intertwined with fragments of his present. The voice of the radio wave became a cacophony of voices, his own thoughts, the whispers of the disciples, and the echoes of long-forgotten souls. In the heart of the vortex, Daniel confronted the source of the radio wave's power, a roiling maelstrom of energy that pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm. It was as if he stood at the crossroads of existence itself, a nexus where life and death converged. With a resolute determination, Daniel reached deep within himself, drawing upon the remnants of his own humanity. He seized the threads of his identity, the memories, the emotions, and the fragments of his true self that had been eroded by the radio wave's influence. And with a surge of power, he hurled the essence of his being into the heart of the vortex. The station quaked as the vortex trembled and convulsed, its dark energy recoiling against the onslaught of his humanity. The voice of the radio wave howled in agony, a chorus of despair that reverberated through the very fabric of reality. As the vortex shattered, a blinding light erupted, consuming everything in its path. The station collapsed in on itself, the echoes of the radio wave's power dissipating into the void. And in the midst of the cataclysmic destruction, Daniel's form seemed to dissolve, his essence merging with the light. In the aftermath, silence reigned. The city was shrouded in an eerie calm, as if the malevolent force that had held it captive had finally been exorcised. The disciples' dance ceased, their synchronized movements dissolving into stillness, and in the ruins of the broadcasting station, a sense of closure hung in the air, a lingering testament to the battle that had been fought and the sacrifices that had been made. The symphony of the end had played its final notes, a discordant melody that had unraveled the very fabric of existence. And as the city emerged from the darkness, it was forever changed, marked by the echoes of a battle waged beyond the realm of mortal understanding.